Few people wonder what really happens to the soul of an elderly person after death. When someone who has lived so long departs this world, it's not just a body that's gone, but an entire history that seems to disappear. However, according to reports from the well-known scholar Edgar Cayce, this moment isn't the end, but the beginning of a new chapter. Cayce said that the spirit of an older person carries with it a valuable spiritual baggage accumulated over the years. This baggage directly influences what that soul will experience after leaving the body. The transition, therefore, doesn't happen in a generic way. Each experience is unique, reflecting the life that was lived. According to him, the more awareness a person develops throughout life, the more serene the passing process. The spirit isn't cast adrift, but welcomed according to its evolution. Death, in this context, is just a change of clothes, not an annulment of existence. This process for Cayce is deeply marked by intention, by the love cultivated and by the choices made along the journey. The soul of an older person who lived with generosity, humility, and wisdom doesn't leave alone. It's received by subtle presences who guide it carefully through dimensions of learning and rest. The body may have aged, but the spirit becomes more lucid upon freeing itself from physical limitations. It's at this point that many accounts of near-death experiences coincide with the visions described by Cayce, a sensation of lightness, of returning home, of reunion. And it's important to remember that each soul carries its own time and its own rhythm. If you're interested in these reflections and want to continue following content like this, please consider subscribing and showing your support with a like. It really helps to keep this message alive and accessible to more folks. According to Cayce, after death, the spirit doesn't wander aimlessly. It goes through a period of transition called the review plane. In it, the soul reviews its own life, as if watching an intimate movie where every action, word, and feeling are re-evaluated from a broader perspective. There are no external judgments, but a deep understanding of the consequences of each choice. For older folks, this moment can be especially revealing. After all, over decades, there have been many decisions, encounters, learnings, and also regrets. Cayce affirmed that this review isn't done to punish, but to teach. The soul understands, with clarity, the impact it had on others and on itself. And this clarity is the first step toward the next stage of the spiritual journey. During this review process, many older people experience a sense of liberation. The mind is no longer trapped by the limits of time, memory, or a weakened body. Everything that was lived presents itself with clarity, allowing the soul to understand why certain pains were necessary and how certain joys contributed to its evolution. Cayce pointed out that this phase is also an opportunity for healing. What wasn't resolved in life, when looked at with love and truth, can finally be understood. There isn't a divine tribunal, but rather a deep mirror of consciousness. The soul of an older person, upon perceiving with lucidity what previously seemed confusing, begins to feel peace. And this peace doesn't come from perfection, but from understanding. According to Cayce, many elderly spirits are deeply moved to see how their actions, even the simplest ones, touched and transformed other lives in a positive way. After this review phase, the soul enters a stage of spiritual rest. Cayce described this moment as a refuge of silence and light, where the soul recovers from the tensions of earthly existence. It's like a well-deserved rest after years of effort, pain, joy, and challenges. For older people, this rest is especially restorative. The spirit, freed from physical limitations, can finally breathe fully. There's no rush to the next step. Each soul remains in this state for as long as necessary, until it's prepared to continue its journey. Cayce said that this place of rest is filled with harmony, similar to a welcoming space where the spirit is enveloped by love and understanding. There, spiritual reunions happen. Friends, relatives, and companions from other lives approach, often recognized not by their faces, but by the vibration of affection that remains. These reunions, according to Cayce, are moments of intense joy and recognition. It's not a simple memory, but a living connection between souls who truly loved each other. The soul of the older person recognizes those who departed before them, and who now receive them with tenderness. This happens not as a reward, but as a natural part of the spiritual flow. In many accounts, there are mentions of silent smiles, hugs that don't need words, and a deep sense that nothing was lost. Casey affirmed that true love transcends all barriers, including death. When an elderly soul finds those they loved, there's a healing that is completed. The longing, the absences, the voids that remained on earth are filled by a spiritual presence that cannot be explained, only felt. This is one of the most sacred moments of the entire journey. After this reunion phase, the soul proceeds to a stage of deeper learning. Casey said that death doesn't interrupt the evolution of the spirit, it only changes the environment in which it occurs. For older folks, who carry with them decades of experience, this learning is even more valuable. The wisdom accumulated in life transforms into raw material for broader reflections in the spiritual plane. The soul is guided by spiritual mentors who help it to understand patterns, to recognize repeated cycles, and to visualize more clearly the purpose of its journey. These encounters aren't rigid or academic, but involve a transmission of knowledge that takes place through the exchange of consciousness. Casey described this as a silent process in which the soul absorbs lessons not only about itself, but about the nature of life as a whole, including the interdependence between all beings. In this stage, many elderly souls understand that their lives played an important role in the web of existence. Even the moments that seem small or insignificant in life are now seen as essential parts of a larger design. Casey affirmed that this understanding brings a sense of belonging. The spirit realizes that it was part of something much greater than itself. This generates a new form of gratitude, not based only on good memories, but also on the challenges faced. The soul no longer blames itself for its mistakes, but understands them as part of the learning process. Casey reinforced that no experience is wasted. Everything contributes to the growth of the spirit. And it's precisely this acceptance that allows the soul to be ready to choose its next steps, more consciously, freely, and in alignment with its level of spiritual evolution. It's at this point that one of the most important questions raised by Casey arises. What comes after this learning? For him, not all souls follow the same path. Some may choose to return to Earth in another incarnation. Others remain in the spiritual plane for a long period. The decision isn't imposed, but arises from within the soul itself, which recognizes what it still needs to develop. In the case of older people, there's often a desire to contribute to those who remained. Casey reported cases of spirits who remained close to their loved ones, not out of attachment, but out of love and a desire to support them. They become discreet presences, subtly influencing through intuition, care, and protection. The soul, even after death, continues to be present in the lives of those it loves, not as a shadow of the past, but as an active part of a bond that time doesn't erase. This spiritual presence doesn't directly interfere in the decisions of the living, but acts as a field of support. Casey said that many older people, upon realizing that they can still help after death, feel great peace. It's as if the cycle of life gains continuity beyond matter. And that's why some people report vivid dreams with parents, grandparents, or loved ones who have already passed away in decisive moments. These encounters aren't simple memories, but real manifestations of a spiritual connection that still pulses. The soul of the elderly person, already freed from the pains of the body, finds new ways to express its care. For Casey, this communication happens when there's an opening of the heart, when the pain of mourning transforms into silent listening. In these moments, the spirit can transmit messages of comfort, gentle guidance, or simply the certainty that everything is all right on the other side. This type of manifestation, according to Casey, doesn't occur by chance. It depends on the vibration of who departs and who remains. A soul that lived with love, that learned with humility, and that said goodbye in peace has an easier time communicating in a subtle way. Likewise, those who remain on earth and cultivate feelings of gratitude, forgiveness, and serene longing create a field conducive to these spiritual encounters. Casey emphasized that the bond between souls isn't broken by death, it only transforms. The physical presence is gone, but the essence of the relationship remains alive. That's why many older people, even after passing away, continue to be a source of strength for children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. And this strength isn't explained rationally, but is felt in the silence, in the thought that arises from nowhere, in the decision that seems guided by something greater. In addition to communication with the living, Casey said that elderly souls also prepare for future missions. Spiritual life isn't made up only of rest and memories. It's dynamic, full of learning and choices. Some souls choose to return as spiritual guides, others as teachers in more subtle planes. There are still those who decide to reincarnate, bringing with them the accumulated baggage of other existences. According to Casey, this decision isn't quick. It takes time and spiritual maturity. For older people, this interval between one life and another can be longer, as there are more layers to be understood and integrated. The soul needs to assimilate the teachings of the existence that ended in order to then define, with lucidity, the paths it will follow. This pause is like a conscious interval between acts of a long play, where the actor reflects on the role they played. This conscious interval is essential so that the soul doesn't repeat unconscious patterns in a new life. Casey taught that spiritual evolution requires responsibility. A new incarnation shouldn't be seen as an escape, but as a choice aligned with inner growth. For many older folks who have already reached a certain level of understanding, the next step may no longer be on Earth, but in more subtle planes of existence. There, the experiences are less dense, more linked to consciousness and to service to others at energetic levels. Casey explained that not every soul needs to reincarnate. Some have already completed their cycles in matter and move on to spheres where learning happens in other ways. The soul in this stage acts as a kind of guardian, caring for other consciousnesses in the process of maturation. This doesn't make it superior, but more integrated into the flow of spiritual life. For those who still have learning to conclude on Earth, the return is prepared with great care. Casey said that the planning of a new life involves many factors, such as the ties that the soul needs to resume, the lessons that haven't been well understood, and the contributions that it can offer to the world. The soul of the elderly person, when preparing for this possibility, doesn't return to the starting point, but begins a new cycle with more tools and understanding. The accumulated spiritual consciousness serves as a compass so that the next steps are firmer. According to Casey, each new incarnation should be seen as an opportunity for service, not just for personal growth. And when this return is made with this intention, the soul no longer lives only for itself, but for something greater, contributing to the evolution of the entire human collective. Casey also affirmed that the soul carries with it very vivid impressions of the life it left behind. These aren't common memories, but deep records that remain in the essence of the spirit. These marks are important because they help to guide future decisions. In the case of older people, the lived wisdom becomes a solid base that influences even the new body, the new personality, and the natural talents that will come. Nothing is lost. Every gesture, every thought, every affection lived continues to be part of what the soul is. This continuity is what makes the spirit a being in constant transformation. For Casey, there's no rupture between life and death. There's only transition. Death, therefore, shouldn't be feared, but understood as a moment of passage, of spiritual reorganization. What was lived continues, not as a burden, but as an integral part of the eternal identity of the soul. This understanding of continuity is essential, so that the fear of death loses strength. Casey said that a large part of the suffering at the end of life comes from the idea that everything ends. But when the soul understands that existence continues, the end transforms into transition, and pain gives way to serenity. For older folks, this understanding can be a balm. Knowing that the love lived doesn't dissolve, that the learnings follow with the spirit, and that there will be reunions and new missions brings relief and hope. Casey encouraged people to talk about death naturally, especially with older folks, not as something dark, but as part of life. When this is done with respect, the soul prepares better. The farewell becomes lighter, the bonds are honored, and the passage occurs with less resistance. The spirit continues more whole, without so much attachment and with more awareness. Another point that Casey highlighted was the importance of the emotional state in the last days of life. According to him, the way a person faces the end directly influences their spiritual experience after death. An older person who departs in peace, surrounded by affection, with resolved issues and gratitude in their heart, crosses this moment with more lightness. Those who depart amid conflicts, resentments, or feelings of abandonment take with them these emotions that will need to be worked on in the spiritual plane. Casey reinforced that it's never too late to forgive, thank, or express love. Even if the body is fragile, the soul listens and feels. Every word spoken, every gesture of affection contributes to the transition happening more harmoniously. Therefore, taking care of the emotional state in the last days isn't just a comfort, but a true spiritual preparation. For those who remain, understanding this process can alleviate grief. Casey said that when we know that the soul continues and that this continuity is linked to the way life was lived, we can transform the pain of loss into learning. Instead of asking ourselves why death arrived, we start to reflect on how that life was significant. The departure of an elderly person can become a moment of wisdom for the whole family. The spiritual legacy they leave serves as guidance, as a beacon for younger people. When we honor the memory with conscious actions, we are in tune with the soul that departed, and this connection strengthens. Casey believed that true love doesn't die. It only changes form, becoming more subtle, more silent, but never absent. Thus, death ceases to be a rupture and transforms into loving continuity. This loving continuity is the invisible link that connects the worlds. Casey reinforced that, even without realizing it, many people feel the presence of elderly people who have departed in small details of everyday life. A scent that arises suddenly, a song that plays at the exact moment, a memory that warms the heart for no apparent reason. These signs aren't coincidence. They are subtle forms of communication, silent expressions that the soul continues to be present. For Casey, this presence isn't haunting or fantasy. It's a living bond that manifests when there's attunement. Therefore, cultivating love, maintaining respect, and remembering with gratitude are attitudes that strengthen this bond. The older person who departed can continue teaching, inspiring, and caring, even in another dimension. And this care, even invisible, translates into intuitions, into renewed strength in difficult moments, into correct decisions without logical explanation. Casey also mentioned that over time, the soul of the elderly person gains more freedom to choose new paths. After going through the period of review, rest, and learning, the spirit reaches more subtle levels of consciousness. This means that it begins to understand more clearly its function in the universe. Some souls choose to remain close to Earth, discreetly assisting their descendants, or acting as spiritual mentors to other people. Others, already with fewer ties, move on to dimensions where time is no longer linear and experiences are more linked to the collective than to the individual. Casey said that the more elevated the consciousness, the greater the understanding of the whole. And in this whole, each soul has its place. Death, therefore, isn't the end of a personal trajectory, but the expansion of this trajectory beyond the limits that we knew in life. Therefore, reflecting on what happens to the soul of an elderly person upon death is, in reality, reflecting on life itself. Casey reminds us that how we live directly influences how we will depart and, consequently, how we will continue. Living with authenticity, with love, with purpose, not only improves the quality of our days, but also prepares the spirit for a more serene and conscious transition. The teachings left by Casey don't serve to create fear or mystery, but to broaden our vision of existence. By understanding that death is just a stage of a long journey, we can face aging with more lightness and loss with more acceptance. Knowing that those we love continue to exist, grow, and love us even from the other side, is a true comfort that transforms pain into faith and longing into presence. Ending a life isn't erasing a story. The soul of an elderly person, upon completing its journey on earth, takes with it a richness that cannot be measured in words. Casey taught that each existence is like a chapter of a larger book, and that the accumulated wisdom transforms into light in more subtle planes. Therefore, respecting old age, valuing the final moments, and honoring the memory of those who depart are attitudes that contribute not only to the peace of the spirit that leaves, but also to the maturation of those who remain. When we understand that the end is just a new form of beginning, our relationship with death transforms. We begin to see it with more reverence, less fear, and more understanding. Kayse invites us to look at life and death with open eyes, recognizing that everything is part of the same continuous and wise flow. Throughout this narrative, we have seen that the soul of the elderly person doesn't fade away, but expands. It goes through processes of review, healing, reunion, learning, and new choices. Each of these stages is lived with respect for the trajectory that was built, and there are no two paths alike. Kayse helps us to understand that there is intelligence and love behind each transition. The spirit follows, continues learning, continues connecting with those it loves, and often returns for new cycles. But it doesn't return in the same way. It returns with more clarity, more strength, more light. Knowing this changes the way we live and say goodbye. It brings more awareness to the now and more confidence in the after. And if this message made sense to you, please consider sharing it with someone who also needs to hear this, and subscribe to continue receiving reflections like this. Finally, it's important to remember that nothing is lost. The essence of what we are remains, evolves, and follows its path. When an elderly person departs, they don't disappear. They transform, liberate themselves, and continue to be present in another way. Kayse left a legacy of hope for all of us, showing that the human soul is much more than the body it occupies, that it crosses time, planes, and cycles with purpose. By embracing this vision, we gain serenity to deal with finitude and wisdom to value every moment of life. Death ceases to be taboo and begins to be understood as a natural and dignified stage. May this understanding inspire us to live with more truth, more compassion, and more depth. And may the love that we cultivate here follow us, wherever our soul may be,